Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is your host Whip Union, and in this one there are several advances by the Russians. These are all advances that happened prior to the ceasefire, but the news came out later. Sometimes the news of developments across the front line take up to 48 hours to come out. The advance by the Russians within Vovchansk is actually an advance that took place in April, which has just been revealed today. So we see that there are some delayed information, which we will be covering today. Most of it happened on the 7th of May. Starting out in the south, the Russians have managed to advance here northwest of Andrivka, making a significant advance, gaining control over the fortified positions to the northwest of Andrivka, reaching the outskirts of Oleksivka, and gain control over significant portions of the fields and forest lines to the north. The Russians are here launching an offensive operation to flank the fortified positions of the Ukrainians along the highways. Attacking them from the rear, exposing their weak points, allows Russians to attack these fortified positions and capture them with the least amount of damage taken. The Russians are taking the safer option here, also fighting from the high ground. The Russians have fought over the towns near Zvirove and Bohdanivka during these final days ahead of the ceasefire. It is now revealed that they also advanced further south. The Russians are slowly making their way to gain full control over the border area through the highway to the south and the towns to the north. The objective is to move through the border area to cut off the supplies and then siege the fortified positions and the towns along the main highway. By cutting off the main supply line and the only road that connects the supplies to these towns, the Russians will be significantly limiting the defensive capabilities of the Ukrainians in this village agglomeration along the Vovcha river line. The Russian forces operating near Andrivka are mainly supplying through Kurkhove to the east and Selidove to the northeast. The Russians are here moving through the roads down towards Shevchenko and then through to Andrivka. The Russians are also attempting to use this Kurkhove supply line that goes through from the city of Donetsk through Kurkhove and up towards Konstantinopel to launch further offensive operations further west. However, until the Russians have fully secured the crossings across from Konstantinopel to Andrivka, securing the bridge, and properly supplying the forces here, they'll be able to have numerous supply lines directly towards Pokrovsk, strengthening their western flank of the offensive operations towards the city of Pokrovsk. Therefore, the Russians are here looking to gain control over the border area, not just to have the administrative border under their control, but also to secure the supply lines for further offensive operations towards Pokrovsk and the western flank, advancing along the highways to secure a buffer zone along the western flank of Pokrovsk in a wider area to progress the siege of the city. The Russians also managed to advance directly southwest of Pokrovsk within the town of Zvirove. As we see with this geolocated footage, the Russians advanced both in the northern and southern parts of the town, gaining control over the river line that moves through the central parts. Russians will look to gain control over the forest patches and fortified positions south of Zvirove, which will allow them to move further along the town. The northern flank is secure with the fortified positions under Russian control. This indicates that the Russians have had an easier time to advance in the northern parts, while they've been struggling in the southern parts. This means that moving forward, the Russians are here looking to penetrate into the towns of Pokrovsk, and their foothold within the city will start from the western flank rather than the southern or eastern flanks. The Russians will slowly move along the southwest of Pokrovsk to keep Ukrainian forces stationed within the city and the general area, putting their forces within the fortified positions and creating a defensive line. It is also difficult for the Russians to advance further because it is a single point at which they are penetrating the Ukrainian lines, and with the Ukrainian positions to the south, east and north of their positions, they'll create a fire pocket for the Russian forces entering. It will be struck from three sides. This means that the Russians, if they want to move further inwards towards the city, need to expand their offensive operations on both flanks. Securing the flanks will allow them to prevent such an ambush to be set up by the Ukrainian forces. To the east of Pokrovsk, there has been no development that has been missed over the 7th of May. Instead, in the direction of Siversk, The Russians did not just advance to the north of Verkhnokamiansky, they also advanced within the town itself. Again, with this geolocated footage, we see that the Russians have advanced through the central parts of the town. The Russians are moving to gain control over the town in its entirety, with the fighting taking place in the central parts of it. The Russians have secured the northern flank, and they have advanced fairly well in the southern flank as well. There is this one road that the Russians need to secure to properly secure the town itself, and moving onwards towards the next fortified positions in the area. So far, the Ukrainians are still capable of launching counterattacks in the area to dislodge the Russian forces from the town before they can entrench themselves. However, with the ceasefire ongoing, the Russians may take advantage of it to entrench themselves within the town and then push the Ukrainians out of it once the ceasefire ends. This allowed Russians to move on to the next defensive lines of the Ukrainians in this section of the front line, slowly moving towards Siversk. At the current rate, the battle over Siversk may begin within a month. By the end of May, the Russians may gain control over several fortified positions of the Ukrainians and begin the fighting over the outskirts of Siversk and the fortified positions connected to the town near Serebryanka, Siversk, and the south of the town. In the north, near the Serbets river line, the Russians continue to advance west of Makiivka, where they are pushing in the direction of Rekivka along the forest lines here in the area on the both flanks of the river line, but mainly here on the eastern bank of it. The Russians are moving towards Rekivka through the main road from Makiivka and through the flanks of it, where they are looking to secure the flanks before moving through the main road and reaching the town itself. Rekivka itself is not a large town. It is a small village with just a few buildings, mostly forest lines and forest patches. There are some fortified positions to the west of it, located on the high ground overlooking the town. The Russians are here looking to advance through the north of Novomikhailivka to flank the fortified positions from the high ground and at the rear of them, attacking them from the weak point. This allows Russians to gain as much of an advantage as possible. They'll also be fighting over the fortified positions along the small river line that moves through Rekivka, on which they can storm the town directly head on from the east. This will allow them to gain control over one of the two remaining towns within the Luhansk region that remains under Ukrainian control, and almost gain full control over the region. The main advances of the Russian forces in this section of the front line will be through the main road connecting Kupanki to Onove here in the east of Zvirove and Lusove, to gain control over this pocket here along the Serbets river line, and also to advance in the direction of Liman to the south and Lusove to the west, advancing along the Serbets river line to close in on Liman as they close in on Siversk further south. In the Vovchansk direction, the Russians managed to advance in the northern parts of the town, gain control over several fortified positions and the area, and re-entering the aggregate plant for the first time in many months. The Russians have also kicked the Ukrainians out of the northern parts of the Vovcha river line, except for the eastern parts of the town. The Russians are here regaining control over areas that they lost multiple months ago during a Ukrainian counterattack in this section of the front line. The Russians have almost full control over the apartment complex area, and re-entering the aggregate plant indicates that the Russians may gain full control over the northern bank of the Vovcha river line within the town of Vovchansk, which will significantly improve their positions in the area and will allow the Russians to start the battle over the southern parts of Vovchansk as well. In the future, the Russians will be looking to connect their front line from Vovchansk in the northwest to the Varishna in the southeast through the main highways, gain control over several border crossings and a wider area to supply their forces within the Kharkiv region for future offensive operations towards Izium to the south and the supply hubs such as Shevchenko, Badaklia, and so on here to the west. In general, we see that the Russians continue to prepare the frontline situation for the upcoming offensive operation, which will take place here in this summer period. In the first 7 days of May, the Russians have had an advance of approximately 20 square kilometers a day, which indicates that the territory that I marked out earlier in an analysis video of the Russians gaining full control over the border area through the western flank of Pokrovsk, as well as the eastern flank of Pokrovsk, connecting it with the positions here south of Konstantinivka and operationally circling both Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka, which is approximately 1,300 square kilometers, which indicates that with a 20 square kilometer daily advance by the Russian forces, they'll be able to achieve that within 65 days. If this speeds up to 25 or 30 square kilometers a day, it will happen before July. This will allow the Russians to begin the siege of both cities, operationally encircling both of them by the start of July. And if they develop offensive operations beyond that or storm the cities, they can gain control over both of them by the end of July, which means that in this summer period, the Russians may look to not just gain control over Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk, as well as the border area, significantly improve their positions in the Donetsk region. They can also begin the siege of the remaining parts of the Slovyansk-Konstantinivka line, which will be Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, and Trushkivka, gain control over Siversk and Liman if they continued at the current rate and speed up during the summer period. However, battles over cities are not as quick as expected. As we saw with the Battle of Bakhmut, it took approximately 4 to 5 months for Wagner to gain control of it. Their first foothold took place within the end of January, and they gained full control of it by the 20th of May. So that was 4 months to gain full control over Bakhmut. Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk are both cities that are slightly larger than Bakhmut, however they are also less defensible. If both of them are operationally encircled, it will not take more than a couple of months for the Russians to gain control of them, and the Ukrainian forces simply do not have the forces that are available today as much as was available during the battle over Bakhmut. Therefore, we can conclude that the Russians may potentially take control of these cities at a faster rate, but even if it takes 3 or 4 months, it will be very costly battles, and the Russians' armies are growing faster than the Ukrainians. The Battle of Bakhmut set back the Ukrainians many months in terms of growing their military power, having 2 Bakhmuts driving simultaneously with the battles over Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk taking place at the same time as all the other sections of the front line will have heavy battles taking place. During the Battle of Bakhmut, it was only the Battle of Bakhmut taking place, but now the frontline situation continues on every single section of the front line from Sumy in the north to Zaporizhia and Kherson in the south. This means that in general, the position and situation is significantly better for the Russians, while for the Ukrainians it is very difficult going forward. In conclusion, this summer period will be extremely important to determine whether Ukraine can continue this war or not. If they take too many casualties fighting over Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka, then it is unlikely they'll be able to hold on to the Donetsk region until the end of the year. If they're able to launch a strong defense of both cities and inflict heavy casualties on the Russian forces instead, then they'll be able to hold on to the Donetsk region until the end of the year, further delaying the end of the war. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.